manager for CertiProf, and I want to welcome you to our coffee talk. In this episode, we're going to be with Mark Kilby. Mark is the co-author of the book From Chaos to Successful Distributed Agile Teams. Hey, amazing. Hi, Mark. Welcome to our coffee talk.
Gina, thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much. I was so excited when I was actually able to see you at Agile's 2021. I'm a big fan of your book. So thank you so much for being here with us. Mark,
Sure.
Can you start by giving us a brief introduction about yourself?
As I get more gray hairs, having a brief introduction is harder to do, but let me give it a shot. Started off actually as an electrical engineer. I was the only electrical engineer that liked to code, and so I got into software early in my career. And for about 10 years, I was tech lead, technical manager, and then I came across a whole new class of problems called people. and that's what actually got me into Agile and Agile coaching. And I always had the thing about process. I always liked improving the process. And I loved Agile, but I always had a problem in that I always ended up in the teams that weren't supposed to work Agile, like distributed teams. And so for most of my 20 plus Agile years, I can put it that way, I've worked with dispersed teams, distributed teams, whatever label you want to put on it. I have probably worked with them both in startups as well as very large corporations. So I've probably seen most, if not all, of those scenarios, including all kinds of hybrid remote teams, which we might talk about today, I hear.
Yeah, so one of the things that really got me when I was reading your book was every time that you talk about remote work, that is it. That's the only way how people talk about our teams. But in your book, you actually have 4 different ways of classifying these groups. Can you please explain a little bit about it?
Yeah, there's 4 basic ones. So of course, we'll start with a simple one. Everyone in the office. We all remember what that used to be like. And then the next are what I call satellite teams. And this is where most of the group is in the office, but you might have 1 or 2 or 3 people working by themselves. So it might be work from home. It might be that they work out of a co-working space or something like that. But they're not co-located with any other part of the team. The next group is what I refer to as cluster teams. So a cluster of the team is in one spot, a cluster might be in another spot. You might have multiple clusters. And then the last one is the nebula team, because they're all out in space. So this is where actually almost everybody in a knowledge working capacity was in the last year and a half, because we had to be socially distant.
Yeah.
That is usually not the reason to form a nebula team, but that's kind of where we all ended up. There's actually a 5th, which is sort of a mix of all of those. Yeah. Mix of the cluster and the satellites, and you see those often in the very large companies.
Great. So now that you just mentioned the pandemic, we all know about it, but due to the pandemic, many organizations had to go remote, even if they weren't ready. But now they're slowly trying to go back to normal. But if they start looking for guidance, the information that's out there is very contradicting. So they have information how remote workers actually are not doing their job, but also how remote workers are burned out because of remote work. So based on your experience, what would be the best way of going back to normal, and what do companies have to keep in mind? Is hybrid remote team the answer, or can experimentation help?
Yeah. So the hard part of that question is normal. I don't think anything's really going to go back to normal. I I see a couple possible scenarios, and I actually talked about this at Agile 2021 conference, and there's also in that set of articles I did for pragmatic programmers. But I think what we're going to see is people are going to probably try to work in this hybrid remote way, and that requires certain kinds of discipline. And the fact that people were forced to work remote, and that required a kind of discipline which they weren't ready to take on. I don't think a lot of them are ready to take on hybrid remote either. So the disciplines would be, you might have even heard some of these phrases. If one is remote, all is remote, which means even if you've got most of the people in the office, get everyone on the computer for a meeting so the remote people have equal access. There's equal way for them to contribute. But even then, I find people say, well, but we have these conference rooms. Why don't we just use those? And that's where I came up with patterns in the book, such as the buddy system and the co-pilot. And that's really to get people who are in the office to really connect and take ownership of the connection with remote people. So the buddy system is easy. So think of it, if you're in a meeting with several people in the meeting room and you've got a few people remote, I ask a few in the meeting, please connect with one person that's remote and let us know, can they hear? Can they jump in on the conversation? You're going to be their buddy. You're going to be the one that's going to be their voice when they can't easily break in. So that buddy system can help with that situation. But what I've found is it also helps outside of the meeting. So often that buddy connection lasts outside the meeting, and people will often stay connected more to those remote people. And it works even better if you rotate who the buddies are over time. But that requires a discipline to do that. So that's where some teams will do that well, some won't. Just like some teams will do agile well and some won't.
Yeah, and then what do you think that companies have actually to keep in mind, knowing like,
Yeah,
okay, we're gonna go back to normal. We're gonna be asking people to come back to the office or do hybrid or do.
yeah,
I've seen a lot that a lot of companies what they're doing is okay, you pick one day and you stay working from home one day, but then the team is gonna be rotating every single week. A lot of people, most of us, when we think about remote work or even we just what it comes to our mind is physical distance, but in reality we don't take into account the operational distance or the affinity distance that for me is really really important, and I don't think that companies really think about it. So can you
yeah,
elaborate a little bit on that?
yeah. So you're kind of hinting to some of Dr. Karen Lejeski and Dr. Richard Riley's work on virtual distance. Um, so their latest book came out, was it April of last year? So April 2020. So just as things were heating up with the pandemic, uh, they came out with a book that summarized their well, now it's 15 years of research across various industries, various size companies, from individual contributors all the way up to executives. They run through these different measurements, and what they came up with was the physical separation or the physical distance is actually has a very small effect on what they call virtual distance. And virtual distance is this feeling of separation. So while you and I are connected through the Zoom call, we chatted a little bit beforehand, and so we built some of that connection, which is important to have online. Um, the next thing that was more important is what you were calling operational distance. That's where, do we have the right tools in place? Do we have the right infrastructure in place? And are people trained? Do they have the skills to use them? because sometime, well, this happened a lot actually at the start of the pandemic, where everyone was forced to go remote and they got thrown into Slack. And not that there's anything wrong with Slack or Zoom or any of those, but they just got thrown into tools that they'd never really used that much before. And it was disorienting. So that's where that operational distance increased for a lot of people at the beginning of the pandemic. But they figured some of that out. But the big thing that Lejeski and Riley found in virtual distance that you mentioned was the affinity, the connection. It's really all about the connection. And that's what Johanna and I talked about in our book is how do you maintain that connection for teams and also between teams. If you've got a large product that they're trying to build together as multiple teams, having that connection between the people is what you really want to focus on. Most companies, not a clue on that one. And that's the big deciding factor on whether you minimize that virtual distance and are successful remote. So kind of coming back to that theme of disciplines, if companies pay attention to things like virtual distance, I think they'll start to see ways to make that connection. And certainly with the hybrid remote approaches I've seen, the who's in the office and who's out of the office, if that's an entire team that's in the office, then they'll probably keep a higher affinity because they're staying together. But if it's part of the team is out of the office and part is in, that's where the affinity definitely drops and it becomes more of a problem. So I think a lot of companies are going to struggle with hybrid is what's going to happen. And they're either going to make the decision to go fully remote, or they're going to make the decision, okay, we're going to bring everybody back. And that's going to have other ripple effects because not everyone wants to go back to the office.
Exactly. I've seen actually I think 40 million people actually resigned this year. Was it in April?
I believe it. Yeah, I believe it was close to that. And that's what's referred to as the Great Resignation. I think that's one of many.
Sorry, no, it wasn't 40. It was
I think it's four million. Yeah, 4 million. Yeah, I was sitting there thinking about it. It's like that seems off by a factor, but yeah, then we'd really have the headlines. But I think that's what's going to happen is people are going to try hybrid. They're going to realize it doesn't quite give them the benefits that they're hoping for, and companies are going to want to move back to everybody in the office. But the people who want to work from home are going to say, no, I don't want that. And I think we're going to see other great resignations. It might happen all at once. It might happen in a few waves.
But going back to the question, do you think that hybrid remote is the answer to, I know you said that we're very, very far from normal, but do you think that hybrid will be the answer?
I think it'll help them find the answer. I don't think it's the answer. I really don't. I think it's a stopping point for companies to decide, what are we going to do? How are we going to embrace the way that work is changing and what people want? Or are we going to stay in the pre-pandemic, everybody be in the office? While I personally enjoy remote work, I don't believe that remote work is for everyone, but more people now realize, hey, I don't have to spend an hour, 2 hours, 4 hours in a car trying to commute. I save so much time. And it's not only the individual saving time, but it's the companies benefiting from that because, who's been stressed out from commuting? Me. So, yeah. Who wants that? Yeah, I caught up on a lot of audiobooks, but there's also, I don't want the road rage. So more people are starting to realize that. So I think you're going to see, I think we're going to see some kind of headbutting between employers and employees as they try to find that norm. And I really think hybrid while hybrid is being proposed as the solution, and I keep seeing best of both worlds, sorry, hybrid is actually the worst of both worlds.
Oh, wow. Okay. So let me show you something. I saw this image in you shared,
Oh, yeah.
and I loved it. I loved it so much. But I was at the beginning, I was a little confused because I
Yeah.
didn't understand like the pairs and the colors of the shirts. But then I was reading, and it comes down to the body system. So
Yep.
can you explain how you came up with this image and what's really important and the takeaways that we need to take from it?
Yeah. So this picture actually shows the buddy system, and it also kind of hints at the co-pilot approach as well. So the idea here you have that hybrid team actually. So you've got people in the office, that's the upper right there, labeled A, the company office. You've got people clustered in another space, that's on the bottom part, and here I labeled it co-working space, but it could be a satellite office. I used to work for a company based in Boulder, but they had a satellite office in Denver because some of the people lived in Denver. They didn't want to commute all the time. And then in that upper left portion, those are the work from home people. And some of those connecting lines are showing different ways that they're connecting to each other. So one individual connecting to another, that's probably somebody in a buddy system arrangement. One cluster connected to another, that's probably where you have some co-pilots. So let's say you've got 4 people in the office that are meeting together, and maybe there's a cluster in that satellite office or co-working space that might be 3 people, and the co-pilot is just the person kind of reading the room in that other space, and they might have their own little back channel, or I don't know where I put my phone here, but yeah, there we go. That might be the co-pilots are on their phones kind of communicating, hey, the folks here in my office look really upset with what you just said. And so they can send those kind of messages to each other, or something like, I see a lot of confused faces here. Maybe we want to go over that again. So they can clue each other in that way, or they can just kind of break into the conversation as co-pilots, but they're co-facilitating any events or any meetings together. So it's kind of helps keeps those clusters of people going together. And so that picture really showed there's a lot in that picture. So I'm not surprised people would be confused when they first look at it, but hopefully the article that went with it helped.
Yeah, and also like going back, I think that we keep forgetting how we human beings need the connection.
Yeah.
So I really, when I saw it and when I read about it, I was like, I really love this. I would have never thought about actually about the body system, how it can help so much. Like you were mentioning, like if you're in a meeting, you see like somebody's confused, or like me on the other side explaining
Yeah.
the stuff, but on actually in the office you can barely hear what the person is saying, or you're sharing the document that you're not supposed to. And then that constant support can help so much
Yeah.
and can facilitate so many of the little details that sometimes you have and the issues that you can have like every single day.
Yeah. And then that remote person says, wow, somebody's actually looking out for me. I actually feel a part of this team, rather than they're just ignoring me.
Yeah, I love that. So going back to the Nebula teams, the remote, the 100% remote
Mhm.
teams, what are the biggest challenges that these teams have?
So the biggest challenge is, again, not paying attention to that affinity. So I've seen some remote companies where they kind of completely ignore the cultural aspect. So one company I worked with, when they interviewed me, all the interviews were by phone.
Mm,
And when I started working with them, I said, okay, first thing we got to change is that interview process, because that stinks. That you immediately, there's like no connection there. And that's where we introduced video interviews. And for me, the culture begins at first contact. So even when you're interviewing, say you're not everybody, but your top candidates, why not do a video interview? Why not take some time to really make it clear up front? And this is what I would do is if you and I were interviewing, I would say, Gina, I want to treat this as a conversation. So feel free to ask any question anytime, because this is where we're trying to figure out if we can work well together. And that's how I would do those. I would start those interviews in just being more conversational. And yes, there were certain questions I would have ready, and I would kind of go through my checklist, but it's really making sure that can they communicate well? Do they frame themselves well in the picture? So I'm looking at your view right now. You got a nice clear background. My background's a little busy and distracting, but what can I say for right now? But this is an example of this is not the background you really want to have, uh, but at the same time, you do want to show a little personality. So this is actually my wife's desk behind me. She has lots of personality,
It's so
and
funny because before the call, I was actually talking to our videographer, and I was telling him, "Can you please check on me? Like, is everything fine?" And he's like, "Oh, I really don't like that background because it's too plain." And he's like, "Do you have like a something better, like a
yeah.
desk?" And then I was like, "Well, I have my husband's office." But on the back, he has like all his books, but he also has like all his superheroes, little like
And
from
then
like
you have to explain all that.
yeah.
So
So I was like,
yeah.
I'm gonna stay here.
Well, it used to be where on the top of her desk, I used to have this. And people would ask, "What is that?" And I would explain what cartoon is from, because I watch that cartoon a lot with my kids. But I also explained, well, this is my facilitation partner. So when we would have all hands meetings and we bring everyone together, he would come with me and was a key part of the facilitation. And so I'm now able to relate a little bit of the story, my background, or I'll say, I think it's super important that you share a little bit about yourself in any conversation that you're in. So now you know I'm a Star Trek geek.
Yeah.
Uh, but that's part of that building that affinity is don't be afraid to show a little bit. So for your background, say family photo or something like that. Whatever you feel comfortable with. And not everybody's comfortable sharing that, but share, as I talk about in the book, share some context so that people know you have a family, and that, oh, I've got to go take care of my 6-month-old. I'm going to be late for this meeting. And the team will understand that because they have that context. Because we are now bringing our work into our homes in this model. So we have to have that, at least some affinity there.
Yeah, I love that. So now let's turn the question a little bit. So we talked about the challenges that remote workers have, but what about the challenges of managing a remote work team?
So the biggest challenge is the T word, trust.
That is so true.
Yeah, you have to you have to have trust. Micromanagers will never do well on remote teams. Um, and actually, if it's a knowledge worker environment, you're hopefully hiring smart knowledge workers, which means you shouldn't have to micromanage them anyway.
Exactly.
So yeah, so why worry about that? Instead, just be very clear. And this is where I like to co-plan things with teams. So um, it's bringing the key stakeholders and the team together and have a conversation about here's what we need and here's why we need it. And the team coming up with, okay, here's how we can get there, and here's here's how long. So you hear the how side from the team and the what and the why from the stakeholders. And by setting up planning so they have that kind of understanding conversation, it makes it easier for the team to say, okay, yes, we can have this outcome by this time, and just set up some simple checkpoints or some simple ways of showing that back to the stakeholders so you don't have to micromanage. But if there's no trust and you're asking the team to track every hour of every minute, I've been in those situations. They're going to spend enormous amounts of time doing administrative work and not actually delivering the value you want them to deliver.
Totally agree with you. So we spoke about the teams, we spoke about the managers. So let's talk about HR. What is the future of HR having people all around the country, languages, the overlapping hours? So how does that work, or what are the best practices?
I'm sure. Well, actually, I've talked to a few of them. I know it, and I've worked with HR folks before in agile organizations, and that that wasn't too rough a transition. But this transition to remote, yeah, their heads have all exploded now. Uh, Mostly because, um, like here, if we're talking the U.S., there's the federal regulations and then state regulations. Well, now if you have employees in all different countries, and let's say you're a small company, how in the world do you keep track of that? So there's actually a bunch of firms that have popped up in the last 3 to 5 years that handle a lot of those details for you. And I think HR is probably going to rely more on those. I don't I don't think HR is going away, or but it's focusing more on the people and outsourcing some of the legal details to some of those other companies. So you see some of these new titles like head of remote, but before that you saw uh, head of people ops or people operations.
That's true.
It's the same thing. It's really, how are the people doing? That's the most important part of a knowledge organization.
Exactly. So, do you think that remote work is going to lead to salary adjustments? I was thinking, especially on the USA, that you're hiring people that have the skill sets that you're looking for. But now, since we're doing a lot of remote work, these people could be in Brazil, even in Latin America. So, do you think that we should have salary adjustments, or base it on the country where the person lives?
Yeah. Let's go back to the easy questions. No, wait. so, so yeah, yeah. I mean, that's so challenging, for a number of reasons. One, what's fair to the employee, and honestly, what's fair to the company, uh, because we saw, and I'm sure you read about this too, where people left Silicon Valley during the pandemic
Yeah.
because they realized, oh, I'm working remote. Work. I don't have to live in this expensive place now. Betting that they could continue to do it that way. Uh, but should they retain their same salary? I've That's a tough one, but I think, and I've even been in the situation where um, companies would occasionally stop hiring uh, staff in North America because the salaries are usually higher, and would hire more in South America because some of those countries are actually producing some very good knowledge workers. I've worked with a few people from a few countries down there, and um, just I think what's going to happen is, yes, there's probably going to be some salary adjustments short term, but as those knowledge workers in other countries in the lower paid areas get more experience, those salary, there's going to be more competition for them, and I think it's going to start maybe in 10 years, it might balance out in some way. I don't know. Because before it was it was lower cost of living because there wasn't a lot of tech there. There wasn't a lot, and now we're starting to see that shift in in not only what the people in other countries get paid, but also what's available to them in those areas. And in some cases, they decide, well, but I really want to move to Europe, or I really want to move to the US or to Canada. So I've seen many of those cases too. So does that mean they automatically get bumped up? Do they keep their same pay? You know, it goes both ways there. It's just it's not an easy one to solve.
Yeah, I mean, and we have a lot of homework to do now with the whole remote working. Um, so I have a question. So not a question, but last year we decided to adjust our remote work certification to be free of charge because we believe
Mm,
that everyone, no matter the role, no matter where they are, they
yeah,
should know the best practices for remote work.
yeah.
Based on your experience, what's the number one advice that you can give us to have a healthier and more sustainable remote work experience?
So so I would say overall, work out loud. So you want to be very clear with your colleagues how you're progressing on work, because then it's less likely you're going to get stressful conversations about where are you with this, how is it going. Um, the other part of that is if you're working out loud, you should feel free to step away from the screen. Don't stay in front of the screen all day long. It's the worst thing you can do. So I'll often just walk around the house. Sometimes I'll go take a walk around outside. I'm in Florida and it's summer right now. You don't do a lot of that in the summer, but yeah. But um, but when the weather's nice, go walk outside for, especially getting out in nature is is important. Or for those of us with kids, go hang out with your kids for a while. So it's a nice break. And actually, for me, I found sometimes when I do something completely different, if I'm wrestling with a problem and I go do something else for a while and I come back, I go, oh, I've got the idea now. So it's actually better if I step away from the work for a while, that I found. So,
Yeah, it happens to me all the time too.
yeah, yeah,
So, lastly, you launched your book 2 years ago.
2 years ago.
Now you have so much data with the pandemic. Are you currently working on having another book or the following, or like what are you working on right now?
Oh, um, well, probably not about remote, because another thing the pandemic has brought is an explosion of books on remote work. Uh, I lost count of how many books got published in the last year, and there's there are some good ones out there. There's some that are you're probably better off just reading on the internet. But um, I am working on another book that deals with more of the the issues of navigating challenges like this. So right now it's referred to as exploring an open space mindset, and I'm doing this with a new co-author, April Jefferson. April and I have um, worked together. We facilitated together, and we found some common themes on how we approach work and life in general, and that's what the book is about. And we've actually um, interviewed well over 50 people to extract some of their stories about how they've used some of these same ideas. And so that book is hopefully coming out the end of the year. So we've both been busy. So
That's amazing. So, Mark, where can we find you? If we want to
uh,
know more about your work, we want to follow you, where can we find you?
yeah, so the best place is to go to my website, markkilby.com, and there on the About section. You can contact me. You can find how to follow me on social media. I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn primarily. You can also reach me through the website. And you can, of course, reach me in my email, mark@markkilby.com.
Awesome. Are you thinking or planning on doing any in-person events in the near future?
Isn't this an in-person event?
You got me.
Got you there. It's funny. I was actually invited to go to an in-person event in May, and I don't think it happened. I think they ended up canceling it. So it just depends on when the in-person events happen again. 2022, possibly 2021. No, not with Delta. not with the Delta variant.
So true. Well, Mark, it was a pleasure having you here in our coffee talk. Thank you so much for your help and for your time. And we hope to have you soon when you launch your new book.
Oh, I'd love to come back.
Thank you so much, Mark. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell to know about our upcoming episodes. See you next time.